So Karina and I, along with two other colleagues, they're in Mexico, one at the Colegio de Postgraduados in Texcoco, Mexico, and the other now a Ph.D. student, but also an independent research scientist specializing in gender development in Zacatecas, Mexico. So we conducted a binational study that I'll report to you about today. I've also done research in India on hydropower related to energy issues. But this today is about renewable energy that is solar and wind power, and we compare two sites, one in Arizona and the other Zacatecas. So we, by doing applied research, we wanted to look at women's lives and livelihoods and renewable energy. And we asked the questions of how are rural and urban low-income women gaining knowledge about and accessing renewable energy in Arizona and Zacatecas? And what are the benefits? We also looked at of renewable energy technologies for domestic and agricultural water use across gender, social class, and age. And the methodologies we used were various. We did in-depth and follow-up interviews, as well as a binational survey that had the same questions on both sides of the border to a great extent, except for some particularities for each area, as well as focus group interviews and participant observation at community festivals and during volunteer days at community gardens. That was in Arizona. And Karina participated in the research, conducting the research, as did another research assistant, Ceci Cuevas, in Arizona. The research gaps that this study really focuses on is renewable energy, women and irrigation in urban and rural areas, renewable energy, especially for heating water and moving water. For irrigation that, as you know, is so important in arid areas like Arizona, but also in Zacatecas, among urban, low-income, and other at-risk women. And we also, look at it from the perspective of energy justice. In an article that we've just come out with in Energy Research and Social Science, though, we did look also at these issues from the perspective of feminist political ecology. And I'll show you what article I'm referring to at the end. That's coming out this fall. But for this talk, we'll just use, for the sake of simplicity, energy justice. It's complex as it is, but from a gender perspective, which hasn't been done as much. And also, we look at how can renewable energy be used to meet SDG, that is Sustainable Goal, Development Goal 7, which is access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all, and with the goal of meeting this by 2030. And renewable energy, as you can see, is mentioned in SDG Goal 7. And but we're looking at SDG 7 and saying, okay, well, how can we integrate gender into this? Because already from an energy justice perspective, SDG 7 does a decent job by looking at how all can really benefit from this affordable and modern energy for all. So when we look at it from an energy justice framework, we look at it holistically because energy justice looks at energy systems from the production of the energy to the consumption of the energy and everything in between. And it also identifies new actors. And that's what we're looking at, is new actors that haven't really been looked at before. And so it seeks this, framework seeks to use social science research to apply justice principles to energy production and systems and energy consumption, energy activism, security, and climate change. And so we look at energy justice to focus not only on one scale, but on two different scales of energy production, large scale production as well as small scale production. So our sites in rural and urban areas and peri-urban actually areas in Arizona included, for those of you who know the area, Tucson, South Tucson and Flowing Wells. And in the rural area, it looked at Cascabel, which many of you will not have heard of. It's a tiny little community in Cochise County. And the reason for that will become clearer why we chose Cascabel. You might be wondering that. In Zacatecas, Mexico, which is in, as you see, northern Mexico, we chose also urban and peri-urban areas as well as a rural community, and they were also within about 16 miles from the city, the rural area. So in both areas we had similar distances between the urban and rural areas that we studied. And for those of you who know Zacatecas, it's also semi-arid. Many of the same plants grow there, in fact. The only thing is it has a higher elevation and is colder in the wintertime, which does mean different energy demand, as we'll see. So in then these two locations, we compared two large-scale renewable energy projects. So La Bufa in Zacatecas, Mexico is a wind-only renewable energy project. And it was basically built for supplying a Volkswagen, VW that is, factory in two different cities of central Mexico. So the energy is mostly transferred through the grid to central Mexico. And there is, a surplus produced, so that is just for the grid in general. It is 130 megawatts of wind power that's produced at this wind park. With $35 million investment, 300 temporary jobs were produced and 50 permanent jobs. There are 90 wind turbines, they're Spanish, and about 11,000 hectares of farmers' land was used. Now let me explain how it works. So basically the farmers who agree to this will basically let out their land in perpetuity for this wind generation to this park. They will never get the land back again to use how they want. If they decide to go back into agriculture, for example, they cannot do that. So it is, a decision fraught with risk. They also did not know at the time when they had to decide to give over their land, how much they would receive in rent. And in fact, women said, who were interviewed, that, oh, anything is enough, and so they really did not have a good idea of how, this would benefit them, if at all. In Arizona, we found a wind and solar park combined, project that produced a similar amount of megawatts of energy, 30 megawatts of wind power, 101 megawatts of solar. The closest community was about 10 miles away from it, whereas in La Bufa, the communities were right there. I'll show you a picture, and they're very close to the communities. Here in Arizona, Red Horse 2 and 3 is what the combined wind and solar park is called. It's one of the largest combined renewable energy parks in the US. And it only produced 5 full-time jobs, and there were 15 wind turbines and many panels. In fact, Red Horse 3 is an extension of the panels, so they extended the number of panels. And there were 101 hectares of ranchers' land that they bought, and government land was used. As you know, in the West, we have a lot of land that is under the Bureau of Land Management. And so it is easier in the West to gain access to land. And this is run by a management company, but for Tucson Electric Power. So all of the power is going not to local communities, but rather being basically generated for Tucson, for the city of Tucson, for residents there, the urban residents. So we talked to people about what they saw when they looked at the landscape that was now being converted into this landscape for renewable energy generation. And these are both recent projects, about 2015 and 2016 is when they came on board. And they said that the views had been obstructed mainly not by the wind turbines and certainly not by the panels, but what they especially noticed was the transformer towers. And this is also what was causing the bat and bird deaths. In fact, in around Cascabel, Arizona, the US Fish and Wildlife took them to court basically because they said that there were an unusually high number of bat and bird deaths. In both areas, eagles are prevalent, and in both areas they had unusually high deaths. And but in Zacatecas, the turbines, as I mentioned, are much closer to residents. In fact, out of an apartment window that the research assistant had rented, she could see the wind turbines very close to her apartment building. Whereas in Arizona, they're far away even from the local community, the closest rural community. Now, so the energy justice implications of these large-scale renewable energy projects from our standpoint is that those providing land to large-scale projects should benefit in terms of energy provision, like in Zacatecas, right? Those who are very close, like in the rural and peri-urban area, to these wind turbines are not benefiting at all in terms of, for example, lower energy costs. And all of the energy produced is going to other areas, to industries in the case of Zacatecas, and to an urban area as in the case in Arizona. Those living near large-scale projects should benefit in terms of energy provision, and that greater autonomy is needed by local populations related to the energy sources. So, they should be given the chance to use this energy in the way that they see fit. Often it's for issues related to water, like pumping water and heating water. And they should also be given either shares in the profits. That has been done with hydropower, for example, projects in Nepal, where local populations got benefits from local renewable energy projects in the sense that they had shares in the profits generated from this large-scale energy production in their backyards. So that is one possibility for making these large-scale renewable energy projects more just. Okay, so then to compare large-scale impacts with small-scale renewable energy project impacts, we looked at the same areas, peri-urban, urban and rural Zacatecas, as well as those locations that I showed you on the map in Arizona. So here you see the two possible sources of energy, but in different scales, nicely portrayed by these photos, in the sense that on the photo on the left has both the, in the peri-urban area in Zacatecas has windmills, but it also has, or turbines, but it also has a sign that is an ad for solar hot water heaters, which are small scale renewable energy projects that are becoming more and more popular as the price of compressed gas is going up. And there on the right, you see on a house, you see these commercial solar hot water heaters. So the two small scale and large scale are nicely juxtaposed here. So let's look at some cases then. We'll meet Betsy, who is, that's a pseudonym, is a community leader in the Cascabel Conservation Association. And so she has multiple uses of solar and wind on her property. And a lot of people come to see her property because she hosts, under non-COVID conditions, the Cascabel Fair every year. So she, is a strong proponent of local production of energy. And as a source of basically sustainable energy. So you can see that she makes multiple uses of, solar panels as well as wind power for irrigation, and she runs a fan for her greenhouse with solar panels. And she does that for a kitchen garden as well as for large-scale ranching, which she uses a solar-powered pump for pumping water to a cattle pond. So she's able to tailor these technologies to her uses. And since it is a more remote community, the pump for the cattle pond is actually the only energy that source possible almost in that area. Okay, so then we have a community leader called Samantha in peri-urban Zacatecas, and she was trained by a nonprofit organization in how to make her own basically hot water heater with renewable sources, basically, or recycled sources, which is recycled plastic water bottles and PVC pipe. And so then she has trained others in her community, and she also signed up women to get training by the same nonprofit organization. But the nonprofit organization's funding was politicized, and so when those politicians got out, basically the funding dried up, unfortunately. But these, basically very low cost solar hot water heaters were used by people with very little money to save a lot of money on their heating, water heating costs. It was basically half of the cost of propane gas and a fraction of the cost of a commercial solar hot water heater. Men, though, were more likely to be able to create micro enterprises to make these than women. But she said, that her husband, while he was first not at all in favor of this, and her participation even in the trainings, she said he began to really appreciate this technology. And she said, my husband bathed thanks to trash. Now, another community leader is Ginny in Cascabel. And she's the coordinator of a rural community garden that is off-grid. So it has no source of electricity other than the solar panels that are there. But she herself, in her own home, also lives off the grid by design. She does not want to be on the grid. And she has 8 solar panels for living off the grid. Her house is oriented towards the sun. She has an on-demand propane water heater that only heats water when needed. And she also irrigates a kitchen garden with a community shared well that has a solar powered pump. And she says that living in Cascabel supports the community side of sustainability. So she too is able to tailor her renewable energy and energy efficient devices to meet her needs. So this community garden that Ginny runs is communally farmed, and it's off-grid, as I said. It's 3/5 of an acre, so it's small, but it has all around it an electrified fence, electrified by or powered, I should say, by solar panels to keep the wild animals out. And also it uses a solar powered pump for moving water from a rainwater harvesting tank. Gardeners explained that producing energy locally is consistent with producing food locally in terms of sustainability. And you can see some of the technologies that they use on the left here, one for the pump on the top and the bottom for the fence. So again, they're able to use these technologies to do what they would not be able to do in this case, which is to farm communally and sustainably. In terms of gender issues, there are more women than men farming, and Ginny is a woman who heads this community garden. Moving on to the urban area, we also saw very innovative uses of solar technologies in the city of Tucson with a social justice component. And so Las Abuelitas, which in Spanish means the grandmothers, is a housing center or housing development run by a local foundation in the city of Tucson. So it's a low-income housing for basically the idea is to have cooperative places or spaces for childcare, children to play, and also a community garden, as well as meeting areas. Now under COVID, unfortunately, a lot of those things are restricted, but still, there are some outdoor spaces. And They also have passive solar built into each home, and each building or each home is net zero. So it produces more actually than it consumes of energy through their use of solar panels. And they have many solar panels that you can see, for example, on top of their parking, but also near the community garden so that gardeners can sit in the shade. And it also produces energy for lighting the garden. Now, the problem has been here is that although it was produced for grandmothers, that's why it's called the Grandmothers Housing Center, it got, basically caught up in federal laws. So by federal law, you cannot restrict who gets access to subsidized housing. So Housing and Urban Development has that law. So they could not restrict the applicants to grandmothers raising children. And there are a lot of grandmothers raising their grandchildren because of the high rates of incarceration in Arizona, as well as the opioid crisis. So that was initially why grandmothers got together with the Primavera Foundation to say, hey, we need this kind of housing. But unfortunately, they are now in the minority of residents, but still residents many of them are female-headed households, and some are multi-generational households. In Zacatecas too, we focused on the elderly and elderly women, especially as a especially vulnerable group, and with respect to energy access. And here too, many are raising grandkids, but it's due to migration. And elderly women with deteriorating health, we found, heat water with wood boilers or electrical water appliances, which are dangerous and not very efficient, and also you have to carry that heavy water then. They also, we found, cannot access government programs promoting solar heaters. Now, sometimes politicians will actually give out solar hot water heaters, especially right before a vote. So they hope to gain votes that way. But elderly women, we found, cannot go to cities to avail of these hot water heaters from the rural areas, like Benito Juarez, where we studied. They lack political power, so often they can't negotiate a free solar power water heater. They also have often roofs that cannot sustain a heavier solar hot water heater because they live in poor housing conditions. So again, here in Zacatecas, we found that elderly women were vulnerable to energy poverty, which actually Karina will talk to you more about, but also they were not able to access even renewable energy promotions, in this case by the government. So to conclude then, an energy justice framework with a focus on SDG 7 helped illuminate that there were very few benefits to local populations of large-scale renewable energy projects near them. And benefit sharing, as I discussed, programs like has happened elsewhere with other types of renewable energy could partially remedy this, but also basically ensuring that some of the energy goes to local populations would help. In Zacatecas, in the wind generating areas, they're saying that if they do develop the project further to include solar panels, as has been discussed, then the local populations are saying that they would demand cheaper energy from those solar panels, that not all of the energy would be fed into the grid for the urban areas, but instead that the local rural areas would benefit in terms of lower energy costs. So they are already starting to see that they have to come in at an early stage and really voice their demands. In terms of female community leaders, we found that they played a really important role in both Arizona and Zacatecas to help spread knowledge about small-scale renewable energy projects for women. And these projects include lower energy costs, including for pumping and heating water. And these projects also included projects that changed gender stereotyping. For example, like that the idea that women actually can construct their own solar hot water heaters and use technologies, develop their own technologies for their own use. And also, you know, these included an increased involvement in environmental protection. So in the case of the solar hot water heaters in Zacatecas, children realized sort of when the sun was shining, when it was not, when it was rainy, when it was cloudy, because of the need to bathe around the times where there was sun. Women gained valuable skills in community leadership in this way. Renewable energy for domestic and agricultural water use was part of other sustainability initiatives. You saw that there was rainwater harvesting going on in some of the locations, and there was also, you know, the use of recycled materials and, you know, energy savings, like through the use of passive solar techniques. Now, we did realize that often either the government or foundations initiatives to get you know, solar power out to many people failed to reach the people that you know, are part of the vulnerable in terms of energy issues, that is women who are elderly. And we found that in Tucson as well as in Zacatecas. But in Zacatecas, there was no similar initiative to try to get housing that incorporated solar features into it, you know, available for low-income groups. So that might be an idea going forward to bring this to, you know, Zacatecas. And in fact, there was a community workshop where our collaborators in Zacatecas, you know, basically showed this to decision makers in the government. And in Arizona, there was more bottom-up initiatives than in Zacatecas to meet women's and communities' needs. And organizations are supporting the scaling up of these. In Zacatecas, the projects were instead more state-supported and clientelistic, which unfortunately also impacted their longevity. They were in basically fleeting programs. Basically to conclude, we'd just like to make the announcement of our forthcoming article, which is coming out in Energy Research and Social Science. And we have an article, Patriarchy and Electric Power, a Feminist Political Ecology of Solar Energy Use in Mexico and the United States. Our funding came from the Consortium for Arizona-Mexico Arid Environments, CASMEX, from the University of Arizona. And we also want to acknowledge the research assistant of Ceci Cuevas. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. Karina, do you want to go forward now, or shall we do questions in between?
I think I can start.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll stop the share here.
Okay, well, hello everyone. My name is Karina Martinez. I'm a PhD student at the Arid Resource Science Department. And this was my master's research when I was in the Master's in Development Practice program. And I worked, let me minimize this here, okay. So I researched energy poverty energy poverty in the city of Hermosillo, and I use different concepts of energy poverty and evaluated how they affect public policy in Mexico. And why it's not, sorry. So energy poverty has been gaining a lot of importance over the last couple of years in different countries, and especially in Europe, where the research and public policies that seek to reduce or eliminate this type of poverty have advanced more over the years, and the knowledge of other countries in this field has motivated the study of energy poverty at the national level in Mexico, because they realize that there's a need to identify who suffers from energy poverty, and also what are the underlying reasons for energy poverty. But it's still necessary to develop a method of evaluating energy poverty that it's adapted to Mexico's characteristics and different regions. And because this will allow us to identify which households are the ones in the energy poverty situation. And there have been very, very few studies that evaluate energy poverty in Mexico. So the objective of my research was to, first of all, was to test the idea that only communities with high marginalization rates are the ones that suffer from energy poverty. And in order to test my idea, I decided to evaluate two different concepts of energy poverty on the three levels of marginalization, which are high, medium, and low, and to analyze whether the difference are significant between the results. And although there are no current public policies in Mexico focused on reducing energy poverty, there have been different programs implemented that indirectly are helping to reduce energy poverty. But it's really important that Mexico recognizes the problem and adopts or modifies one of the methods that we already have, so that it can be more effective for the special situation that Mexico is facing. And this is one of the pictures that I found, and it's one family from one neighborhood in the outskirts of the city of Hermosillo. And this is how they manage heat waves. And they usually sit down outside under a tree. Most of the time they water outside so that it feels a little bit cooler, because what happens is that the heat is stronger inside of the house than outside. So this is what happens, and usually it's women, elders, and children, the ones that suffer from this type of situations in the city of Hermosillo. So there have been different concepts of energy poverty since the 80s, when it started in the United Kingdom. And there are wide ramifications, and we can divide them into 3 different approaches, which are thermal approach, income approach, and consensus approach. So for this research, I decided to compare 2 different concepts that are used to define energy poverty. And the first one was the Energy Poverty Handbook, which established that in order to not suffer from energy poverty, a household should not allocate more than 10% of the income. And if it exceeds 20%, then that household suffers from extreme energy poverty. And then I decided to use the Garcia and Grace board concept of energy poverty, because this is actually one of the few studies done in Mexico that addresses the issue. But in this case, Dr. Garcia decided to focus on satisfying basic needs that are identified in the law in Mexico. And these ones include lighting, entertainment, water heating, cooking food, refrigeration of food, and also the thermal comfort in the home. And this only applies to regions of the country where they have higher temperatures during summer. So this is my study area. So the city of Hermosillo, it's located in the northwestern part of Mexico. And the city of Hermosillo, it's the capital, and it's also the largest city of the state. And as of 2015, it was the 16th largest city in Mexico. So the Ministry of Social Development established the marginalization index, and this is the one that I use for the selection of the neighborhoods. So this index divides the marginalization into 5 different levels, which are very high, high, medium, low, and very low. And because very high and high level of marginalization had very small number of neighborhoods available, I decided to merge those 2, and I did the same with very low and low. So I end up having 3 levels of marginalizations, which are low, medium, and high. Sorry. And after I identified those, I randomly selected 2 neighborhoods of each one. Okay, I'm gonna go back a little bit because I think I got a little confused. So what I did is I identified the neighborhoods that were on this marginalization index. And then I divided the city by sectors, which is north, south, east, and west. And then what I did was I selected 2 neighborhoods randomly from each sector and also from each level of marginalization. And I also, this was for the household surveys, but I also identified that there were older, vulnerable populations in the city, like children, elders, and women. So I decided to also select at least one from each sector of the city. So this is how I did my selection. I was supposed to end up with 24 neighborhoods, but what happened was that on the east side of the city, there were not, there was a problem in the east side of the city because there was no low marginalization neighborhoods in that area. That was back in 2017, and there have been many changes in the city. I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have that problem nowadays. So I had a general survey for the household, which I divided into different sections. I had questions about related to the payment of electricity bill, purchase of electrical appliances, the energy consumption, and also what ways they had to refresh their home, and also to share the experience that they've had with the electricity system. And then I did surveys for organizations, and I asked general information about the institution, also follow information regarding income, the energy use, renewable energies, and then also I asked about energy consumption, the frequency with which certain tasks and activities were carried out. And also I asked some questions about construction materials and the electricity service. And also at the end, I asked a little bit about the frequency of appliances, the frequency use of appliances in these centers. So these are some of the vulnerable groups that I identified, and I did 7 surveys, but these are the ones that I'm going to talk about. So the Comisión de Protección y Asistencia del Menor, this is like Children's City, and they have, they provide comprehensive care to children in situations of abandonment and abuse. They grant them protection, provide them with a home where they can develop healthy. At the time of my visit, they were home of 47 minors of both genders. And then CPB Solidaridad, this was a shelter for minors that suffer addictions. And this provide group therapies and help them to raise self-esteem in order for minors to move away from different problems and addictions. They provide therapies that include cultural programs, sport programs, social activities. They help to readapt the minors to their family and society. And at the time of my visit, they had 33 children living in the center. Then I also visited Guadalupe Libre, which is another shelter for children and adolescents. And these are for kids that were either abandoned, orphaned, or that they were living in street situation. And at the time of my visit, they had 32 minors. This Casa Libre shelter, it's only for boys. And then I also visited Hogar Sor Maria Jesus de Sacramento, which is a center for the elderly. It's a private institution, but it receives donations from the community. And sometimes they get grants from a government agency, but it's not that often. And most of the elders that live in the center are elders that were abandoned or who live in a situation of violence. So what happens is that they get complaints and then they get transferred to this institution. So using the Energy Poverty Handbook definition, which is based on the allocation of no more than 10% of the income of the household for the electric bill. I found that during the fall season, the medium level of marginalizations are the ones that allocate a higher percent of their income to pay the electricity bill, and they are considered extremely poor energetically, according to this concept. And the high level of marginalization, it's not that far from the extremely poor category. The only one that, and also the low level of marginalization, it's really close to the energetically poor category, but it doesn't reach that category yet. And this is during the fall season. As we can observe, they allocate a lot of their resources. The average income on the medium household was 7,343 pesos. I had here, just so that you get an idea of how much that is. The minimum wage in Mexico is less than 1,500 pesos, which is like $75. And that's what they get paid every 2 weeks. And having to pay a little bit over that on the electric bill, it's, you know, it's a burden for families. Something that I also found was that high level of marginalization communities had more inhabitants, and that's why they have on average a little bit more than the medium level of marginalization communities in the income. But the medium level of marginalization had usually between 4 inhabitants per household, 3, 4, and the highest level of marginalization, they had more. They had, usually they had elders also being taken care in the family. And comparing the results from fall to summer, we can see that every single level of marginalization, it's considered energetically poor. The medium and the high level of marginalization are considered extremely poor because of the percentage of the income allocated to pay or to cover the electric bill. And this is not just a problem in the household level. So as we can observe, on this slide, these were some of the comments that I got from this nonprofit organizations that work with vulnerable population. And Hogar Sor Maria de Jesús Sacramento, well, I think, yeah, that one, it's the one that works with elders, and they were really concerned most of the time because during summer, between 50 or 20% of their budget goes just to pay the electricity. And because of the high cost of the electricity, they can only cool their rooms. So the common areas have fans, and this is a really big problem. As we can observe here, even though that they reduce the energy use and they try to use more wisely the energy, they still allocate between 50 to 20% of the budget. And this is a problem because we're talking about elders that are more susceptible to dehydration and also heat strokes. And this is a current problem for them, and not only for the elders, but also the staff members that have to be there working with them. They also suffer from this type of problems. And comparing this to Casa Guadalupe, which is a children shelter, they also depend on donations, and they have similar situation during summer, and what they do is that they put all the children in the same place. Let's say they have like a big living room and there's only one TV, and all of them have to remain in the exact same place. If they want to go to a room, if they want to go to the kitchen, there's nothing to mitigate the temperature in those places. And also children are really vulnerable to heat strokes, dehydration, and they also mentioned that much of the cases the kids kind of feel dizzy when there are heat waves in the city. So now I'm going to talk about the results that I obtained using the Garcia and Grace board concept. The results were not satisfactory at all because they did not show any difference between the communities with the highest index of marginalization and also those with the lowest index of marginalization. Using the equation that they provide, I basically obtained 0% of energy poverty in the households that I interviewed because they all met the established indicators. And I just wanted to highlight how is that possible? How I can say that there's no energy poverty when at the resident level, the Cuartel 20 neighborhood, it's a high level of marginalization neighborhood. And one of the residents stated that there are 4 people living in that house, but during summer nights, they'll have to sleep in the same room because they cannot afford the electric bill. So what they do is they have an AC unit or swamp cooler, and that's what they use to get the thermal comfort, but they cannot use it on the whole house or on different rooms. They can only use it during the night so that they're able to sleep, and they'll have to be together. And the same situation happens. The South neighborhood, it's considered a middle level in the marginalization index. And they also have similar situations. Now, compared to the other one, they don't sleep in the same room. But what happens is that they cannot turn the air conditioning during the day. As well as the other residents, what they do is they only turn the AC units at night so that they can manage to pay the electric bill. The electric bill in the city of Hermosillo, I think it's the worst nightmare for all the inhabitants. So there are a few programs or policies that even though they were not created or they were not focused on reducing energy poverty, they do help reduce the energy poverty indirectly. Okay. The electric subsidy, this subsidy, I couldn't find when it started, but since I have memory, every summer we have an electric subsidy rate. And in the state of Sonora, it used to be only in the city of Hermosillo. Then it expanded to other big cities in the state. And thankfully this year we got it in the whole state. And the numbers that I provided on the previous results, the average of the electric bill, it's counting that subsidy, and still people are not able to move out from that category of energy poor. And in 2015, Mexico decided to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and cleaner sources of energy. And that's when that's when policymakers created the energy transition law. sorry, and this law was the base for the creation of different programs that will help Mexico to increase the use of cleaner energies. One of the programs that was created was the Sustainable Integral Improvement Program. This program was intended for people that were making less than 5 times the minimum wage, which is still very, not a lot of money. It was intended for them. And the objective of this program back then was to finance up to 50,000 pesos, which would be like $2,500, so that they could buy more energy efficient appliances or to purchase solar panels for the household use. And there were many, many problems with this program, even though it had like a very good objective. There were a lot of problems on the design of this program. And this is where, this is all I found back then when I finished my research, but I looked a little bit to update what happened after I finished my research. And turns out that the energy poverty was added to the energy transition law. Now it appears there. They identify it as a problem, and at the same time, they created this green mortgage program in 2019. So what the green mortgage program does is that when people with low income purchase a home, what this program does is that a small percentage of that a small percentage of the money that they get to purchase the house goes to energy efficient appliances. I think it's like 5% of whatever you can afford for a house. The government gives you like coupons that you can go to different stores where they use them, where they take them, and you can get newer appliances that are greener or more energy efficient. And this is to help them reduce the energy bill. And one of the things that I forgot to mention with energy poverty, the identification of energy poverty in this law is that they did identify it, but they didn't define what energy poverty is for the government of Mexico. So, to finish, the results that I obtained showed that the idea that only communities with a high marginalization index suffer from energy poverty is not correct, because as we can see, in cities where the temperatures are so high, even in the hottest months of the year, the energy consumption increases, and therefore the payment of the service reaching over the 10% established as a marker of energy poverty in the home. During the summer months, we observed that every single level were categorized either energy poverty or extremely energy poverty. And although there is a consensus of the existence of the problem referred to as energy poverty and the general definition, when designing or perfecting the instrument that helps the affected population, policymakers face a challenge of designing appropriate targeting and also They need to calculate the scope of the instruments that they select to define also the financing part. And the selection of beneficiaries of the social policies in the energy sector, it's the most important part in the design of the instrument, because the success of a targeting mechanism will depend largely on whether the program manages to include the largest number of users who are the ones that need the assistance, the ones that are energy poor, and to avoid including those users who do not need it. And that's it for my part. Any questions?